What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Sorry it's taken me so long to put out a new video. I have been working on some other stuff which I plan on addressing in a dedicated video, hopefully sometime in the near future. Just want to say thank you to those that have stuck around while I was on a little bit of a hiatus. I do plan on continuing to make content for you guys, so again, I just appreciate you guys checking out the videos. Sort of stuck in a little corner of my room right now. I'm finally getting around to painting my studio space. But I don't want to keep talking about that other stuff. I want to focus on the subject at hand for this video, which is the PrimoChill VUE and how it has been working out for me over the course of the past 6 months. Now, before I start talking about the VUE and specifically my experience with it, I do want to say some things in regards to water cooling and specialized fluids in general, because it seems like a lot of people have had mixed opinions. A lot of people have been very angry about VUE for whatever reason. Been trying to throw, other creators and, PrimoChill specifically under the bus in regards to the release of VUE. So basically what I want to say to that is, guys, if you do your research before you do a custom loop build, which you should be doing, you will find that I don't care which fluid that you're going to use, especially any of the opaque fluids. There's just so many variables that come into play, but if you're going to have solids in a fluid passing through very small microchannels in a loop, just expect that in some period of time you're going to have issues with it. There is no perfect fluid that looks pretty or has an opaque appearance. You could run distilled water with special additives and have very little issues or no issues at all. But if you want to go for the fancier looking coolants, just expect they're just not going to be a long-term solution, and they're not going to keep your loop clean. So, in regards to complaining about how PrimoChill VUE has been causing issues where it's clogging up people's blocks and that sort of thing, of course it has. I mean, maybe PrimoChill didn't do the greatest job sort of explaining how this was going to work long term. I'm not even really going to get too much into that. But again, like I said, if you guys do your research, any opaque fluid, I don't care who makes it, is going to cause issues. And, that may range for some people. They may be able to run the fluid for a long period of time with no issues, depending on how their loop's set up. And some people might start seeing issues within a month. But regardless, just expect it. If you don't want those kind of problems, stick with a very basic coolant, or just don't even get into water cooling in general. Now, with that being said, let's get into my situation specifically, and I'm going to try to do my best to be as thorough as possible as far as, giving you guys all the necessary, information and details that you might need to sort of connect the dots as far as what sort of experience you guys might have. But just know that, like I said, every experience is going to be different. There are so many different components and arrangements of a loop, and just so many variables that can come into play. So just because I've had a certain experience doesn't mean that you are going to have the same. So I actually got in on the very first batch of PrimoChill VUE. I ordered 3 bottles. They weren't sent to me. I paid for them at the pre-order. They actually shipped out pretty quickly. I want to say that I got them back in November. At the time, my build was fairly new. I'll try to show you guys some pictures, but I completed my build probably about a month before the VUE came out. And initially, I started out with just a distilled water mix with Mayhem's X1 and a couple drops of some blue dye. Very basic. And essentially, I just did that to sort of get a feel for how I would like to have sort of a blue-looking coolant in the build. But all of the components, aside from, I think, my pump I reused, but I know all the radiators were new, all the blocks were new, fittings were reused mostly, tubing was obviously new. So for the most part, it was a pretty new loop, and I initially ran that fluid mixture, I think, for about a month. Then when I finally got my hands on the VUE, I drained out that loop, and my loop actually drains very well. I suspect that some people have had issues because the way their loops are set up, they're just not able to really drain any of the previous fluid out very well. I did actually do a video months back on some tips and tricks on how to sort of create an easy to maintain loop. But make a long story short, when you want to swap fluids out, you want to make sure that you're able to very thoroughly drain and flush out whatever was in there previously. But anyway, that's what I did. I flushed it out with some distilled water. I did run the PrimoChill Sys Prep in the loop for 24 hours as they suggested before I put in my first bottle of VUE. I actually started out with the gray color, or no, not the gray color. It was the steel blue. So I started out with the steel blue. You guys can actually see that in the video I did where I compared the PrimoChill VUE to the Mayhem's Aurora. But I started out with the VUE. I think I ran that for about a month, and ultimately I just didn't really like the color that much. It wasn't that I didn't like the VUE, I just didn't really like the color, even though a lot of people gave me crap in that video for complaining. That's beside the point. But anyway, and then I switched ultimately to the sterling silver, which is what I've been running since then. And when I did the fluid swap, I drained the steel blue back into the original bottle. I just did a quick flush with distilled water, and then I added the sterling silver, and that was that. And I've been running it ever since. I put the sterling silver in December 25th. It was actually Christmas Day, 2017. As of filming this today, it's July 4th, so it's been a little over 6 months. And as I'm sure many of you are curious, I haven't really done any testing lately, and I certainly haven't opened up the blocks to see how everything looks. But I think this has been a very good duration of time to get a good feel for how this coolant may perform long term. Now, unlike what some of the other guys have done, I don't plan on just simply draining out the fluid and then opening up the blocks and seeing what they look like. That's just not really my style. I know that we could probably see some funky stuff if I did that, but the way I plan on doing this is I'm going to drain the fluid back into the bottle because I kind of want to see what it's going to look like in comparison to some of the other bottles that I still have. I'm going to flush the system probably a few times with some distilled water because I want to see how well any particles that are built up will flush out under pressure. As far as I'm concerned, if you can easily flush the system, even if there are some particles built up in some of the blocks, I don't really feel like we're going to have a whole lot to complain about. Obviously, if you just go straight to opening up the blocks and seeing some gunk in there, that may seem really bad. But if it flushes out easily, as far as I'm concerned, it's not really that big a deal. I may even run, I do have another bottle of Sys Prep, so I may run that through again, see if that helps to break any of that stuff up. Because ultimately, if I can flush the system, which I feel is a pretty easy step, and end up with some pretty clean blocks, I don't really feel like there's going to be a reason to complain about it in the way that some of the other people have. Now, before I get into draining the system and flushing it out, I want to take a closer look at not only how the fluid is holding up as far as how it looks, does it still have kind of that neat effect, and also I'm going to do a couple stress tests on both the CPU and the graphics card to see if I'm experiencing any sort of thermal issues that I haven't necessarily been paying that close attention to. I can tell you I haven't had any issues with overheating or throttling, but we'll take a closer look at that with some IDA64 testing, and maybe I'll run Firmark on the graphics card and kind of see where the temps are. Obviously, if it's clogged up enough to where we're experiencing thermal issues, that sort of defeats the purpose of having water cooling, but I don't really know that until I run the tests. So let's dive in here and first sort of focus on how everything looks to the naked eye. Obviously, when you use a coolant like PrimoChill VUE that has a very special characteristic, you want to be able to sort of maintain that look for as long as possible. And as far as I'm concerned, especially compared to Mayhem's Aurora, the sort of effect of the fluid has held up very well. I can still see it swirling around in the reservoir, and I can still sort of see it moving through the tubing. The block, I can see it moving. I do see what appears to be maybe a little bit of funky buildup in here. Let me see if I can get this on camera. Yeah, there might be something going on in there. We won't really know that until we get a chance to sort of flush things out. But I think the effect has kind of dulled down a little bit, but overall it still looks pretty cool. So after 6 months, I would say PrimoChill VUE still looks pretty neat in the system. As far as I can tell, flow doesn't seem to have been impeded at all. And as you guys may have seen in a previous video, I have had experience using Mayhem's Aurora on multiple occasions, and I can say that the effect of Aurora, although I do like how it looks over the PrimoChill VUE, the effect falls out pretty quickly. That those particles in the Aurora aren't I don't know the best way to explain this because I'm not a chemist, but they're not suspended and locked into the fluid as well as they are with PrimoChill VUE, so they tend to settle and stick on the inside of basically everything in your lube. So it's always a real pain to clean everything out after using Mayhem's Aurora. I've yet to really figure out what it's going to be like to clean this out, but it seems that whatever creates this sort of shimmery effect in the VUE has stayed mixed up in the fluid very well. And I also want to show you guys this. So this is the bottle of gray VUE that I ordered along with the other two colors, and it's been unopened, essentially been sitting on a shelf for months. I haven't really shaken it up. Now you can see if I barely move this, you can see that that shimmery effect is still very much present and throughout the entire bottle. But if you look, and I don't know how well this is showing up, there is particles that have settled to the bottom of this container. So like I'd mentioned at the very beginning of the video here, if you're using any sort of opaque fluid, just expect some sort of particle separation over time that is probably going to collect in the very small micro channels in the blocks and possibly even in your radiators. So I think even the best formulated fluids, if they have to have any sort of solid particles in the fluid to create the effect, it's essentially inevitable that it's going to end up stuck in portions of your loop. But like I said before, results are going to vary based on, various different, parts of the loop. But anyway, I have been running a stress test on the CPU only. I don't know how long it's been, 15 minutes or something, but temperatures have leveled off, so we can just take a look at this. As you can see, running 7700K. Guys, this is delidded. I run mine at 4.9 gigahertz. I just don't really see a need to push it any further than that because I'm able to keep the voltage fairly low, and 4.9 is definitely a respectable clock speed. And temperatures seem to have leveled off right in the low 60s. Now, I will say, I think that is a little bit higher than what I was leveling off at when I first installed the fluid, but I don't think there's much of a difference. And obviously low 60s at full load at 4.9 gigahertz is definitely a safe and respectable temperature. So I won't say that the fluid has caused any issues to more or less trash the results of the overclock and the cooling. If anything, we've maybe only seen a few degrees higher than what I was initially seeing when I first installed the fluid. So I've been running a Firmark, just stress test, on the graphics card, and as you can see, temperatures have steadily been rising, although now I'm hitting right around 90 C and I'm starting to see some thermal throttling. I don't have an overclock on the GPU currently because I want to just sort of do some raw testing here. And yeah, it does seem like I'm getting thermal throttling with my graphics card. So curious to see what sort of effect this fluid is having in the block here. But yeah, I think that the evidence here speaks for itself. So my plan was to do a time lapse of the entire process of me flushing the system out, but unfortunately I did not pay attention to how much space was left on my memory card, and in the middle of filming it, it basically stopped. So to fill you guys in, I ended up flushing this system 4 or 5 times. I think it was 5. I didn't really keep track, but I'm pretty sure it was 5 times with distilled water. And then I got it to a point where I felt like it was pretty clear. And then I added the system reboot. And immediately, I don't know what the heck this stuff does, but it must have worked because it actually, I guess, freed up a lot of the additional VUE particles that must have been stuck in some of the different places. And just to clarify too, earlier in the video I said before I initially installed the VUE, I used SysPrep, and I misspoke. It's this stuff, System Reboot, which PrimoChill says loop cleaner with VUE in mind. So what I'm going to do is leave this running in the system for at least a day. It really all just depends on when I'm going to have time to break this back down and actually open up these blocks. So it'll be at least a day, possibly a couple days, that I'm going to leave this running in here to see how good of a job it does sort of flushing the system out. So here we are about 24 hours after running the system reboot. Just kind of showing this because I think it's interesting how much of the effect of the VUE has resurfaced after what I thought I had flushed completely out because the fluid was clear. So yeah, it seems like that system reboot definitely does something. So the next step is I'm going to drain this out, and I'm going to flush it again, and I'm going to run just the distilled water in here and see what sort of results I get from that. Alright, so we're back again. I've drained out that fluid. I flushed it, I think it was 3 times. You can see there's a little bit of the effect still in there. I didn't really feel like it was necessary to keep flushing it until it was perfectly clear. I think we can still figure out what's going on here, but been running the IDA64 stress test for a little bit, like 20 minutes. Still the same overclock, and it seems like we've pretty well leveled out around 58 to 59 C, which I think is a definitely a respectable temperature. So this is me doing a voiceover after I shot this initial footage because, as it turns out, my testing is a little bit flawed. Now when it comes to the IDA64 testing on the CPU, that's totally fine. But normally when I set up the water cooling loop after everything's done, I set my fan curves to ramp up based on coolant temperature, and I have a temp sensor in this system, and I thought that's how I had it set up. But either I overlooked it during the initial setup or I accidentally changed it at some point. But I actually had the fan curves based on CPU temperature. So obviously you can see a problem there if I'm only stress testing the graphics card and the CPU is essentially idle, then my fans are not going to ramp up to accommodate for the rising temperatures. So that sort of explains why I was seeing temperatures gradually rise and hitting thermal throttle, which I hadn't noticed previously, probably because when I'm using the system normally, especially when gaming and there is a load on the CPU, the fans are probably ramping up and we're avoiding that issue. Good thing though is maybe you can see from the footage here that there is a difference between my initial testing and my post-flush testing. Prior to flushing the system out, the temperatures ramped up pretty quickly and hit that thermal throttle, I would say in less than a minute. Whereas after I flushed the system out, I was actually noticing that the time it took to hit thermal throttle was a lot longer. I mean, I think, yeah, maybe I should have kept better track of it, but it looked like it took almost 5 minutes to really get all the way up to the point that it was hitting that 90-degree threshold. So I think it's safe to say that there definitely was a difference. Unfortunately, I can't go back and retest it with the proper fan curves, but I think you can see that after I pulled these blocks out of the system, opened them up, there really was not a whole lot of buildup after I did that flush. I suspect had I not flushed the system and just pulled them out like a lot of people have done, there would have been a lot more gunk built up. But I think that taking the necessary steps to properly flush the system and use the system reboot really helped to clean these blocks out, so I didn't have to sit here and scrub them out like a lot of people have had to do. So all in all, I'm pretty happy. I'm surprised with how clean they came out. The CPU block had some gunk in some areas that was a little hard to clean out. It was mostly cosmetic, but on both the GPU block and the CPU block, the fins themselves were pretty clean, and I suspect had I just kept the system together and continued to run it this way, I probably would have been totally fine. Now, with all of that stuff out of the way, it's time for a conclusion. When the VUE first came out and I first got it in hand, I thought it was awesome. When I first installed it in the system, thought it looked amazing. After using it for 6 months, I still think it's awesome. Is it a long-term coolant? Probably not. Is it low maintenance? Definitely not. But like I said in the beginning of the video, I think that if you're going to use any sort of specialized fluid or any opaque fluid for that matter, you can pretty much expect that it's not going to last in your system for very long before it starts building up in the smaller channels. So I think that's just kind of common sense. But I think if you do all of the proper preparations and then just expect that after a period of time, you're going to have to flush that fluid out, possibly even run some sort of cleaner through the loop, I think you'd be pretty satisfied with the maintenance. It's not really that big a deal, and if you're going for that sort of look, it's just kind of one of the things that you're going to have to deal with. But if you want low maintenance, long term, I would avoid any opaque fluids whatsoever. Now, I will say this, compared to Aurora, since I have run that in a few systems previously, that stuff is a nightmare to clean out, because even after just a month of running it, it cakes up. I shouldn't say cakes up, but it lines everything with that silvery fluid. I did not see any of the shiny particles built up anywhere in the loop. And in fact, when I drained it back into the original bottle, it still had the same sort of effect that it had from day one. So I think PrimoChill definitely accomplished the goal of, having a fluid with that effect that does last long term. So I'll give them that. But it is an opaque fluid. There is solid particles in the fluid to make it opaque. And naturally, when that fluid is running through very small channels, it's just going to build up over time. I haven't seen any manufacturer produce an opaque fluid that doesn't build up in someone's system over time. So I think as long as you know what you're getting into and you don't, set some unrealistic expectations, I think anyone would be happy using this. I would have no problem recommending it. In fact, since you guys have stuck around so long, I'm sure this video is going to end up pretty long. I do have this unused bottle of the gray VUE. So any of you that live in the United States that are interested in having this, leave a comment down below with a link to some pictures of your build, and I'll look through those and I'll just pick someone that I think the fluid would look nice in, and I'll send it out to you. I'll cover the shipping cost, and you can try it out for yourself. But aside from that, I hope you guys liked the content here. If you have any additional questions, feel free to ask in the comment section down below. But aside from that, I'm going to go ahead and call it here, guys, and hopefully I will see you soon in a new video.